Good morning, everyone. Welcome to House of Sweden. My name is Karin Olofsdotter, and I have the great honor of serving as Sweden's ambassador to the United States. You might wonder why you are in a completely black room. It's no coincidence. I first thought that the architect had run out of ideas and money, but it is to show you how dark it is in Scandinavia in the winter time. But don't let that put you off. Do come and visit our wonderful country. It's great for your Americans right now traveling with your currency to our currency, so more than welcome. Well, it's wonderful to see so many of you here today, both here in the room and of course joining us online from all over the world. And I also want to thank Atlantic Council Digital Forensic Research Lab for co-hosting this event with us, and to the Nobel Foundation and the National Academy of Sciences, their partners and supporting organizations. Well, today's event is part of the Nobel Prize Summit. It is a testament to the enduring legacy of one of the most famous Swedes of all time, Alfred Nobel. And what we do here is celebrate his vision for a world shaped by knowledge, peace, and progress. And the theme of this year's Nobel Prize Summit is Truth, Trust, and Hope. How can we build trust in truth, fact, and scientific evidence so that we can create a hopeful future for all of us? And that is, of course, an extremely important question on days like this. Today's discussion on fighting disinformation could not be more relevant. In our digitalized and connected world, with access to an abundance of information, influence activities are a serious and persistent threat. We, of course, now, unfortunately, are experiencing increased tensions and conflicts around the world. We see influence campaigns to continue to exploit our vulnerabilities. And they are gaining traction as well, and spread throughout our societies. This development is challenging the values that are fundamental to our way of life, such as democracy, rule of law, and human rights. Alfred Nobel, he was convinced that ideas, facts, and scientific discovery are at the heart of human progress towards a better world. We are hosting this event here in House of Sweden today, as freedom of speech and freedom of expression are two core values for the Swedish government. But more often, disinformation is threatening these ideals. This issue is not only a matter of truth, but a matter of trust and the open and free dialogue which our democracies relies on. And this threat is global. It requires global response. We need widespread cooperation, understanding, and determination to effectively counteract this development and uphold democratic values. To find scientific solutions that really work, we must listen to the experts. And we are super excited today to have with us today the Nobel laureate Martin Chalfie, who will share his insights into the scientific aspects of this issue. We are also joined by Magnus Hjort, Director General of the Swedish Agency for Psychological Defense, whose understanding of operational aspects of this issue is key in finding solutions. We're also happy to welcome Dr. Rebecca Trumbull, who is Director for the Institute for Data, Democracy and Policy at Georgetown University. George Washington University. It's easy in this town to mix them up, excuse me. Dr. Trumbull has a deep knowledge of these issues based on her own research on political communication, digital research, methodology, and research ethics. So with this excellent panel, I'm certain that this seminar will provide important insights and knowledge. We all need to learn to identify, understand, and counteract information influence activities in our daily lives. It is really our shared responsibility. And directly after this panel, we will get some of the necessary tools to tackle disinformation, as our colleagues from the Swedish Agency for Psychological Defense will lead us in an educational workshop. This is exactly the kind of tools we need to foster resilience, define counter-strategies, and strengthen trust. Only together we can face this challenge safeguard our democratic values, and ensure that freedom of speech and democratic discourse are upheld. So I really look forward to today's thought-provoking and insightful discussion. And with this, I would like to welcome and hand over to Graham Brookie from the Atlantic Council's DFRLab. Thank you so much for being with us today.
So thank you so much, Madam Ambassador. It's wonderful to be at the House of Sweden, and I have to admit, it's wonderful to experience the amount of either darkness or sunlight, depending on what season you're at this building. If you want it to feel like winter and get some hue, then you come down here, and if you want it to feel like prolonged summer and all times daylight, then you go upstairs. So depending on what your mood is, I just want to do some housekeeping on that front. And also in the spirit of building truth, trust, and hope, there's one slight amendation to our agenda for this morning. Dr. Trumbull had a family emergency and wasn't able to join us, or had an obligation, was not able to join us. So we're really, really excited to be joined by Karin, who runs the capacity building programs and educational programs within the Swedish agency that we work with. So really, really looking forward to this conversation. And I think that the Madam Ambassador opened it up very, very well. I do not have my PhD, and so I'll be using a number of notes as opposed to my esteemed colleagues up here. But I think that where we're going to be talking about today is not only mis and disinformation, but also what we go do about it. And so my hope for this conversation is not just kind of navel gazing on a big problem that we all know as a societal challenge, but to get kind of in the weeds about our understanding and what we go do about it, which I think this group is going to be particularly well placed to do. The first question. Oh, and the last bit of housekeeping, I promise. We're going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to turn over to audience Q&A for about 15 minutes before going to the workshop. And so if you have burning questions for any of us, be thinking about those. The first question, we had a chance to connect, full disclosure. We all had a chance to connect before this conversation. And one of the things that came up in terms of how we look at this field as a scientific field, was this concept that was popularized at the onset of the pandemic, in which we faced a moment where, that was pronounced, I think, especially by the pandemic, in which people all over the world were inundated with information. And the term that became more popularized or more commonly used for that phenomena that was happening in parallel to the pandemic was infodemic. And so I'll turn first to Martin. How do you think about infodemic, and is infodemic, in your understanding, something that grows rapidly, or is it kind of a drip, drip, drip? Does it have a snowball effect? And what do you think it does in terms of diminishing trust? And is that immediate and revolutionary, or is it somewhat evolutionary over time?
So I think it probably can work in many ways. Right? I mean, the basic idea, as you pointed out, is to have a lot of noise. If you have a lot of noise, you can't tell what's the truth, what's made up, what's there. It's just you're overwhelmed with information. You're overwhelmed with statements that muddy your understanding. And having to wade through that is the difficult part. So I think this idea of an infodemic is it's not only that there is misinformation, mistakes, or disinformation, purposeful falsehoods, but rather that there's actually so much of it around that it obscures what's happening. I would also say there's another aspect to this, which I would call false equivalence, that there are 2 points of view, they are both equal, when in fact there is 97% of people in climate change, this was talked a lot about, 97% of all climate scientists had opinions that were on one side, 3% were another. You never saw a television show where there were 97 people on one side and 3 on the other. You saw 1 and 1, and it made it a false equivalence. And that's another way of flooding the airwaves of information that just blocks out what is already been a consensus.
The way that we think about this moment in our day-to-day work at the DFRLab is 2 coinciding factors that are global. One is we as a human race have more access to information, whether it's true or false, or whether it's debated or whatever, in this moment in history. There has never been a moment where you can pull out any number of the devices that we have on our person regularly and Google it or search for the answer to a question. And then number 2, there's never been a moment in human history where we're as connected or have the opportunity to be as connected as we are right now. And so that's an accelerant for sure. But I guess my follow-up question on infodemic is, do you think that infodemic, that inundation of information, somewhat illogically leads to less space for debate or discovery of a shared set of facts among a population?
I think it can. I'm not entirely sure. We're sort of talking about something I'm sure will come up about, with other people here, which is how does one develop critical thinking to, and where the most important of these 3 words that are bandied about for this summit, I think, is trust. How do you learn what to trust, who to trust, what things are there? And that cuts down on the other problems. And I think that it's the building of trust in verified science. I think that's a critical thing that we need to do in the future.
So we're going to come back to critical thinking in just a moment. But in the meantime, we have the pleasure and responsibility of sitting in a democracy at this point. All of us that are on the stage. And a big part of building that trust is the role of government in a democracy, a government that is for people and by people. And Magnus, you are in government right now, with a storied career in academia as well as public service. And the role of so I guess my basic question with a long follow-up is, what is the role and responsibility of government in this space of building that trust and engaging with populations on this issue in particular? And I guess the point of context for this group is that we're sitting in Washington, D.C., and in the Swedish system, it makes sense. The agency that you run is called the Psychological Defense Agency, and there's a long storied history and culture around that in Sweden. So what does that look like, and how do you think about the role of government given your seat in government and how you engage with populations and do your work?
Well, thank you, Graham. That was quite a few questions, I think. I'll try to answer them as best I can. Yes, we're a government agency, and psychological defense could sound a bit scary to foreigners that are not used to this kind of Swedish concept that we also spread to other countries. I think Estonia also used the term psychological defense, and still do. They still do in some aspect. It was established in Sweden in the early 1940s as a term of establishing a counter work against psychological warfare. And I think it only makes sense. If you have psychological warfare, you must have psychological defense. So what we said back then was that psychological defense is just as important as airplanes. And we stood in front of enemies like Nazi Germany, who have declared total war on the rest of the world, more or less. And we tried to develop a total defense to counter the total war. So those kind of terms have stuck in Sweden, total defense and psychological defense. And our task is to safeguard democracy, safeguard free speech, freedom of opinion, Sweden's freedom and independence. So that's the basis for what we try to do. I like to say that psychological defense in Sweden rests on 3 pillars. The first is free, independent media. That's totally vital. And independent journalism is extremely important for what we call psychological defense. The other is a well-informed and well-educated population, which is something we are trying to build within our education system, of course, but also through our free media. And the third pillar is trust. Trust between people, trust in institutions, trust in the media. Without those 3, you will have a very lousy psychological defense. So what we do operations, we monitor foreign malign information influence. We do not monitor domestic disinformation or misinformation, only foreign. Should we go into the domestic scene, then that would be to infringe on freedom of expression in Sweden. That we do not do. We only look abroad. So that's very important. And then we do capability or capacity building, which I think Karin will tell you more about. And we're also trying to prepare for a possible wartime situation in the future. There's a major war going on in Europe, as you all know. And this has completely changed the security situation for many countries in Europe and for Ukraine, of course, but also for Sweden. We have made an application for membership in NATO. And so the security situation has deteriorated. And also democracy has declined. There are quite a few organizations trying to measure democracy in the world globally. And they are all unanimous in saying that democracy is pushed back. You can almost say that democracy is under siege. And this is something we need to change, really, because democracy is vital for us all, for the security of everybody. So I think there's a great deal to do, and we need all to engage in it, I think, to safeguard democracy.
It seems like a conceptual way to put that is protecting the parameters of debate within Swedish democracy from things like foreign manipulation, but also protecting speech, number one, and the ability to keep, it's like putting not necessarily a border, but protecting the parameters of an open information environment, which in many ways is the greatest strength of free and open systems or democracies. And in addition to that is sometimes a major vulnerability landscape that we have to look at and say, how do we make this more resilient? Which is a good segue to something that Martin mentioned in the very first question on how do we build more critical thinking in this space, or how do we engage with publics and build up that trust over time? Because this isn't something that happens overnight. It's not like a flip of the switch where we're either trustworthy on one day and not trustworthy the next day, or not trustworthy on one day and trustworthy the next day. And so within the role of government, how do you, Karin, think about the capacity building and the training or the educational aspect of engaging with publics on this issue? What does a program look like, but what is, more importantly, I think, the first step?
Well, thank you for that. Well, as Magnus already said, we're trying to reach all of society, and we're doing this by, for example, building on capacity, contributing on the strength of the population's resilience by spreading knowledge and contribute to the population and relevant actors from all levels for their preparedness in terms of just the psychological defense. And it starts early. It starts by learning kids and youth in schools about fact-checking, as we said, and also by building trust for the institutions. But we also support support on all governmental levels, from national to regional and local level. And that is on how to identify disinformation, and that is directed at Sweden, and it's different how it approaches different levels. There's a big interest from the schools, but it's also from on municipality level. For example, earlier this year we met with over 100 municipality officials in the south of Sweden, and one step that we have learned is very efficient is that we're using a red team, blue team workshop. So first they start off by being the antagonist, aiming on their own vulnerabilities.
Vulnerabilities.
Thank you. And aiming on those threats, and after that we switch, and the same group is a blue team, and trying to counter this information. And this is a work we see also that they can bring for their resilience work on all levels, and also their preparedness planning. So that's one of the first steps that we are using, and it's been very successful.
I have a million questions on this because we engage with civil society all the time in training and capacity building. So how do you look at the online information environment and prove a thing in a major way, whether that is, for our team, human rights abuses of any place in the world, so security kind of related research, or looking at overarching narratives and how they impact populations. And it's scientific, right? It's not, we're not calling balls and strikes, we're looking at how the nuts and the bolts of an information environment work, and how humans interact within an information environment. And so within our capacity building, I really want to talk shop with you. What, in your experience, do students prefer to be on the red team or the blue team?
Well, this is for the government officials. We haven't done it in the schools, but I can say that the red team workshop, everyone is really like, there's so many things coming up, and they have a really fun time doing it. And then it gets harder when you're countering it. Right. How do you do that? And you have you don't have the economy maybe to counter everything. And so it's a really nice way of lifting the problem, and also bringing together all these actors from different levels on how they can learn from each other. And also, as I said, bring this disinformation and psychological defense into the total defense planning that we want it to be a part of in Sweden.
My hypothesis on this, given we're talking about a scientific field of research, is that the red team would foster more creativity.
Yes.
And a little bit more energy, whereas the blue team would foster a little bit of, oh man, what are we going to do about this problem? It's a little bit harder to build resilience as opposed to poke holes in things, or to build things as opposed to tear things down. It's not every day that I share a stage with somebody who won a Nobel Prize, just as a moment of reference. But in terms of the scientific method of building knowledge, I guess, and this is not a planned question, so bear with me here. How does a detachment from fact, whether that's the unintentional spread of false information or the intentional spread of false information, or just kind of the inundation that we're talking about of so much information that it's hard to parse through, how does that impact the work of the scientific field, which has a very deliberate method? And I guess a more pointed question, a way to ask that question is, how can you prove to me that green fluorescent protein is a biological marker? And if I was at the Thanksgiving table, then how does that conversation work in building trust on something that is genuinely and by definition breakthrough knowledge or information?
So I think there's a lot of elements to this. I think the first part is, I don't think there is a scientific method. I think we teach a scientific method to elementary school students, but there's many ways of making discoveries. If you look at the Nobel Prize biographies, you will be astonished to find how many people say, I was doing this, and then by mistake, this happened. And I noticed it, and I went on to work on that. It's, you know, we have this idea about a scientific method is that we come up with a problem, and then we come up with a hypothesis, and then we test the hypothesis, and then we go to Sweden to get our prize. And it's, you know, it's a very straightforward method that we do that. But I think it's a little bit different. Often we make an observation, and that brings a whole set of new questions that we didn't imagine. Green fluorescent protein is actually a very good example of this. When Osamu Shimomura was trying to understand how jellyfish produce green light, they're one of many organisms that are bioluminescent. They can actually use a chemical reaction to generate light. And it turns out that all the different organisms, fireflies, glowworms, bacteria, and so on, they all do it differently. And he was trying to figure out how it works. And he was a very good chemist. He worked really hard, and he failed all the time. And then one night, after a whole summer of failure, he's failed again. He takes his prep, he's hungry, wants to go home and have dinner, and he throws everything in the sink that had some seawater in it, turns off the light, and is about to leave the room when he looks back at the sink and it's glowing. It's something he had never seen before. And he wonders about it and says, maybe it was something in the seawater. What's in the seawater? I've never eaten calcium. He goes back and he tries it. Now, one would say, oh, that's great. He gets the chemical that generates light, but it's the wrong color. Instead of it being green light that's produced, it's blue light that's produced. And that causes him to scratch his head a little bit more and say, well, how could that be? Maybe, he throws calcium into everything, nothing else happens. He says, well, maybe there's something that actually converts the blue to green. And so he goes and takes a handheld light, and he looks at all his samples, and sure enough, in a completely different sample, there's something that every time he shines blue light on it, it glows green. That's what fluorescence is. And that's what this protein that he discovered as a result of two accidents. Throwing it in the sink and having the wrong color. Something that no one imagined was there. So I think there's different ways of doing science. I think there's also different ways that even, you know, if he had done it and he said, oh, this is what I have, that would not necessarily mean that he believed it. He'd have to do that multiple times. Other people would do it. As other people confirmed it, then there would be no issue. There's sort of this confirmation that has to be done. Now, sometimes things don't get confirmed, but maybe because they're not important enough to confirm. But when it becomes an important issue, it's that repeating the confirmation of this. So when you ask me, you know, my part in this was to say, oh, let's put this into a small worm or bacteria that are transparent, and we can actually see genes turn on. We did it. It worked. It was wonderful. And we couldn't keep our mouths shut, so we told a lot of people, and they tried it, and they got it to work. So it wasn't that people just believed what I said. Mm-hmm. It was that they did the experiment themselves and said, yes, this works. Now, elementary and high school students do this and have this experiment. So I don't think, so it's this verification that happens from multiple people. I think that's very important.
Well, it seems like, so thank you very much for that. That's a perfect example in building knowledge. And part of the responsibility here, part of the challenge here is to protect the process of discovery and verification. So how, over time, in a moment, in an era in which we are inundated with stuff and debate and contrarianism and all these things, how do we protect, I guess the definition of resilience would be protecting the ability to discover new things and prove to more and more people that those things are true. Which, for us within the DFRLab, that's the premise of our work, right? We have a team of researchers all over the world that are looking at the online information environment for things, again, like human rights abuses or things that are verifiably false. And the way that we go about that work, whether that's the team that's focused here in DC, or whether that's the team that's focused on the war in Ukraine right now, or the team that's focused on online information environments across Asia or the Middle East or wherever, it's open source. The whole premise of it is transparent methodologies that lead to analysis. And a lot of times that analysis we have high confidence in. And when we're not very confident in the findings, we'll still probably publish it anyways, and we'll be honest about, well, there's a lot of questions here. But the whole point of that is to say, here's how we found this thing. And don't trust us because we're at a fancy organization or an organization that has a name in Washington, D.C. Trust us because these results are replicable and verifiable and accessible to you. And that transparency builds the space for accountability. And so when we go back to the role of institutions in this space, how do institutions navigate a moment where that kind of protection of process or of an environment is really difficult? And I'll turn back to Magnus on this because you have a team that does this every single day. How do you go about that analysis? And I guess more importantly, or as importantly, the communications of that analysis?
Well, we analyze what foreign adversaries, authoritarian states are projecting towards Sweden when it comes to information, of course. But I think you said the word transparency, and that's what it's all about. We need to be transparent to build trust, to build legitimacy. And I'm an historian. I'm fascinated by hearing you talk about these proteins and fluorescence and whatever, which I don't get at all. But I see where you're going, and because disinformation is always also targeting our history. And we can see now that certain authoritarian states are trying to rewrite the story leading up to World War II, for instance, saying that, well, Finland was the culprit in bringing about the attack from the Soviet Union. Poland really started World War II because they did this and that. And we can also see that the Katyn massacre, which was obvious from the start who did it. It was the Soviet Union killing like 20,000 Polish officers in the woods of Katyn and Smolensk. Is now being said, no, it was really the Germans. In spite of Russia admitting it in 2008 that, well, we did it. So by rewriting history, you are somewhat determining how we are seeing the world today. And I think it's research is so vital for our open debate. We need to have transparency, we need to have free research, so to safeguard freedom for researchers to freely find the topics and the methods, it's absolutely vital for psychological defense in Sweden.
It seems like the ability to protect discovery, learning new things, as well as the ability to protect the shared set of facts of what has happened already is really, really key to building up that trust. So there's a baseline. If you're looking at history and you say anything is possible, then we probably won't be that resilient. But if you're looking at new discovery and you say anything is possible, then that's a really healthy place for society to be in terms of innovation and learning new things. And that strikes me as a nice balance for the Nobel Prize Summit. In terms of where we go next. I'll ask one question which was generated by the audience, which is, in this moment in which all of the universe of things that we're talking about is is occurring within a moment of hyperpolarization or increasing polarization, and backslide in not only democracy but basic trust in institutions that we've all worked in and touched and felt and know kind of how they work, whether that's academia or civil society or even media or government or private industry in some shape or form. What does building resilience look like in a moment of polarization in which it's absolutely necessary to protect the dialogue and the debate, but also to decide on a shared set of facts? And I'll start. We'll start on this end and go all the way down on that question.
So one of the things that has come up in the discussions over the last couple of days for the summit has been that people want a feeling of belonging, of being part of a group that they trust. And I think in part it's this idea of building trust. How do you build trust in people? I think it's not a one-time event. I think this is a continuing thing. I've been very impressed with a group in New York City of young journalists that realized that there was a major omission in New York. That is, that there was no one talking to the many immigrant communities that were in New York City, and they decided that's what they were going to cover. And it's called Documented. It's a very impressive group of people. And I was talking to one of the founders, and I asked him, how did things work? How did it work with the pandemic to get information about the pandemic to people? And he said, well, what we have done is we have gone and listened to people, learned about their history, what countries they've come from, what their interests are. We found that, and we found that many of the people in these communities were essential workers, but they didn't have information on how to get the micro grants that were coming up during the pandemic. So they set up lists of information. Here is where you can get this information. They provided a service that was reliable and truthful and important for members of that community. And they became involved. So it's local, it's involvement, it's continual, and as questions came up about the pandemic, members of that community got back in touch with them and said, can you find out about this problem or that problem or how we go about doing this? So they built up the trust first. And it's not pontificating from on high. That's not an important thing. I think you have to be a partner, and you have to be a long-term partner with people. And because we're all in this together, we have to be helping one another.
Well, I would say the same thing we usually say, that everyone needs to feel a part of society and that you belong. And also, what we normally talk about is the democratic conversations, that everyone has the right to raise their voices and make your voice heard. And a big problem facing that is censorship, in being afraid and being aimed and quieted. So I think this is something that is also directed at the political leaders, but also on our level, person to person. So that's a big challenge, and that we have to keep on going. And I think that's a big fundamental is that everyone needs to feel a part of society and the community.
Much has been said. There are many good thoughts. A cohesive society, an inclusive society, where we can all feel that we are part of what we're building. The same democracy for everyone. Critical thinking was mentioned earlier, and I think that's also vital. I mean, we don't have to agree with each other all the time. Democracy is also the right to disagree, and to change government every 4 years if that's what the public wants. And all of those things are things that we need to safeguard, because our future depends on it. As I said earlier, democracy is on the decline, and we need to fight back. We need to prove to everybody that democracy is the way forward. This is a system that actually works. It gives us freedom, and it gives us a welfare society, which I think is absolutely in the best interest of all.
So all that makes sense, and I really appreciate that. I think it touches on what I'll ask as the last question, which is what is your personal reason for hope in the seat that you have, whether in academia or in civil society or in government? What is a reason for it? Because it's pretty. This topic is a challenge. It can be really, really bleak. Whether you're focused on the foreign influence challenge or the more social kind of detachment from facts or erosion of trust in institutions and things like that, it can feel, it's designedly, it is designed to make, that set of challenges is designed to make us feel lonely or disempowered. And a big part of feeling like a partner or feeling as a part of a society or that we're all in this together is a feeling of agency, individual agency. And so how do we build up that as a mechanism of resilience? How do we build up that feeling of agency in individuals? And I guess the other component of that is how does one missing component from the answers is the responsibility that we have in open societies to each other and to a broader whole. So I'll end given the framing of the Nobel Prize Summit of truth, trust, and hope. What is your reason for hope in this space going forward? What is a reason for optimism and action in this space? And I'll start with Magnus and then work all the way back down.
If we don't have hope, what do we have? I mean, there's no other option, really. We need to work for this, and we need to work to make it happen, really. So hope and optimism is the starting point, I think.
Yeah, and mistrust on all levels, we have to put trust on all levels. And I think there's awareness and there's a big willingness to do the work.
So maybe this is not exactly the right way of saying that I have hope, but we've all lived through 3 rather horrific years of this pandemic. And whereas disinformation on various things that did not touch our lives has been around for a long time, but this was a case of disinformation that affected all of our lives and in fact cost lives. And I think that that's given us an urgency. I think the fact that we're simply having this summit is an important beginning step, or one of the many beginning steps, to really come to grips with this, that with bad actors that are disseminating information for whatever reasons they're doing it, and that this is not something that's just a policy debate. This affects lives. And I think, because of the drastic nature of what we've just gone through, I think I'm optimistic because I think more and more people are taking this as a call to action. And I have a lot of hope in that, the ability of people. And frankly, being part of this panel for the last 3 days has been astonishing to hear all the ideas and all the perspectives that people have had. So I have a lot of hope because a lot of people are trying to solve this issue.
Thank you for that. Clearly, we have a lot of work to do on this topic. And I always somewhat joke when we're having sessions on this topic that we're not going to solve it all in one session. We're going to chip away at it. So we'll do another session at some point. But thank you so much for joining this. I think in terms of moving from talk to action, we're about to have a workshop, so I'll introduce that in a moment. But in the meantime, thank you to Magnus, Karin, Martin, so much for all of the time that you've spent on this issue, for your work in particular. and your continued work going forward as a call to action. Thank you so much to the House of Sweden for having this conversation as we move into the workshop. So thank you to Ambassador Olofsdotter. And if you're feeling like you don't have enough vitamin D, we're going to have a workshop and then move upstairs here in about an hour or 45 minutes. And so at this point, thank you so much. And I would like to welcome Per Noren, who is the Senior Analyst and Senior Training Specialist within the Psychological Defense Agency, for an interactive workshop as we collectively, not only us up on stage, but also the audience members here in person, will go into an interactive workshop on understanding and countering information influence activities. Thank you so much.
So, good morning, everyone. My name is Per Noren. I work as a senior training specialist. So, now you can hear me. Good morning, everyone. My name is Per Noren. I work at the Swedish Psychological Defense Agency as a training specialist. So, I coordinate a lot of courses and trainings for mainly the Swedish audience, but also for an international audience. And I'm very excited for you to be here and take part in this interactive workshop that we will conduct now during the coming 55 minutes. I would like you to be able to contribute to this workshop. So therefore, I will, at some occasions during this workshop, ask you to discuss with someone next to you. And for people that are attending online, try to find them to discuss with, but you can also do this by only your own thinking and making some notes on your own. You will also use your phones, and I will use menti.com to try to see where you are in your learning. And we will visualize where you are in the learning on the screens here as well. But I will tell you more on which code you will have or which QR code that you can scan with your phones on the screen here. I'm not sure about the Wi-Fi, I'm sorry. We have to have some technical assistance here with the Wi-Fi in that case. Need a password. Yeah, could we have that from our host?
The event center guest Wi-Fi. Password is 2900, capital K, lowercase street. Wow, you're gonna have to say that again. I'll say it again. It's the event center guest password 2900, capital K, lowercase street, S-T-R-E-E-T. Address of the building. One more time. 2900, capital K, lowercase S-T-R-E-E-T. Everyone got it? Success.
Yes, thank you. I'll continue. When we discuss disinformation, we need to be sure of what we are defending. We need to make sure that we understand our fundamental values that we would like to defend. It can also be called our key values or core values. These have many different names. But I will give you some examples that we use in Sweden. The first one is life and health of humans. It can be both physical health, it can be mental health, it can be protection from accidents, it can be protection from diseases. But it can also be including that we need to protect a healthy lifestyle. It can be also to be protection against violence, both domestic violence and violence in the society. democracy, rule of law, and human rights are also one of the fundamental values we need to protect. And in this, trust is really a core thing when it comes to trust in democracy and trust in the democratic institutions. But we also have to trust the judicial system, and we have to trust and defend every individual's right to live their own life, including in the human rights. In this, we can all try to also aim to live a life with dignity. When it comes to another fundamental value is the environment and the economy. These are put together for this presentation purpose only. We need to be able to protect the ecosystems that we have and the fundamental the services that the ecosystems are providing for us. It can also be the physical environment, the biodiversity as such. And when it comes to the economy, it will be both the private property and public property that needs to be protected. Also the value of production of goods and services. Vital societal functions, and for an example of this could be critical infrastructure, is also important to protect. It can be the emergency services, it can be the water supply, the treatment plants, it can be the sewage, transportation, communication, infrastructure as large. And the last part, national sovereignty. That is control over the territory. That is that we have a control over the political decision-making processes, and also of the supply of needed supplies into the country. It's often seen as a prerequisite for the others. But what I would like to do now is try to see where you are at when it comes to these values. Because in another country that is different from Sweden, or in an organization that you would like to protect, the values can be different. And therefore it's always important to discuss with your team members or within the nation, what are the values that we need to protect? What are we willing to risk our lives for to protect these values? And I would like you to be able to interact with us now with this question. Which fundamental values should be protected by the government? So prepare your phones, please. And here, you will have a couple of minutes here to go to menti.com and enter the code 24207632, or scan this code if you are close enough for this. And I would like you now to discuss with someone that sits next to you about these fundamental values, which should be protected by the government. And you have a slider here now, so you can put points on these. But I would like you to only use 25 points in this. So if you put maximum, that's 10 points. If you put half, it's 5 points. So here we can see your own possibility to your contributions on seeing which values are needed to be protected. If there are any differences. If you think all the values are the same, then you can put 5 on all of them. If you think 2 are most important, then you put maximum on 2. And here we see, we get the results coming in. Interesting. Feel free to interact with your neighbors as well, because learning is great when you discuss with someone else.
Annars spelar infrastrukturen ingen roll om alla jobbar.
Tricky. I was wondering whether there was already a logical order in that. But honestly, for me, the prediction of health and humans is the top. I mean, in whatever form of governance you live, I think that should be the highest priority of every form of government. I think the problem will be, and that's probably what he's going to point out, that all of them are so interlinked that he will probably come to the conclusion, if you don't have this, you cannot do this. If you don't have a system that protects the rule of law, how can you defend your interests? So
okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your contributions. I will just make a brief note on this one. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I see here that I think democracy, rule of law, and human rights is one of the values that you collectively think are the most important one to protect by the government. And the least one should be national sovereignty. And that's very interesting. Who else should protect that unless the government or the state is doing it? But it's just a basis for a discussion, this one. So bear with me, I will not use this result in anything else. It's just good to visualize this for you when you're doing this. So you begin to discuss the values.
What are the Swedish results when you ask this question?
I've never done it in Sweden. So, but I will do it. I will, I promise. Yeah, I think. Okay, I'll continue. Thank you. We'll continue with a Menti later on, so be prepared for another slide. Okay. Okay. Now when we know a little bit more about what needs to be protected, we need also to see that the aggressor are using vulnerabilities, exploiting vulnerabilities when it comes to use disinformation to hurt the values that we stand for. And some of them, there are in this example I'm using 3, but the main important vulnerability is lack of trust. It's not really covered here, but I will give you that in beforehand here. Okay, in the media system, we have a couple of vulnerabilities. And it's, especially these last months, I've seen that rapidly evolving technology might be a vulnerability for truth. When it comes to artificial intelligence and being able to produce text, for instance. It can also be image generation. One example that I'm not showing in this workshop is the images that have come up from the Pope's wedding. Pope's wedding. If you can find an article about that, please send it to me. I would very much like to read more about that. But that's also done with an artificial intelligence generation. So it's not, those are fake. But when you see it, you immediately believe that I don't really understand what I'm seeing here. This is like, yeah. And I will come to that soon. So, but there are also changes in the journalistic business models. When it goes from paper publishing or broadcasting in real time to more online publishing, and when you can actually also be your own journalist. Everyone can become a journalist and have a blog and begin to write things. And these citizen journalists are also a new thing that is actually challenging the whole system. So some of the traditional techniques that can be used by an aggressor are now enhanced by this technological advances. It can be forged letters, it can be photoshopped images, and so on that have been used traditionally for this. And the exploitation for this can be for many various reasons. It can be for the person's own personal benefit, it can be for political gain or economical gain, or just to see if it can be done. So there are many different ways how to use media system vulnerabilities. Another part of vulnerabilities are the public opinion vulnerabilities. And those are vulnerable to social proofing. I mean, when you begin to discuss with someone else, you can say that my experiences are something that can be valid as a truth, as a truth that you can generalize from. But that's not always like that. It's not always true that your experiences are what is general for the whole society. But that's a part, when we interact with others, we like to discuss what we have been a part of. So others can interpret your ideas and your experiences as being correct, even if they're not. Techniques that are used in this way could be fake accounts, fake personalities that are writing about experiences, or that you have troll armies that are giving likes to fakes, just to show that there are more people that think the same and try to make you jump on the bandwagon and think the same. Especially when it comes to using an emotional language or emotional pictures like this. Okay, the third part, cognitive vulnerabilities. And this ties into the others a little bit, like this. It's actually, when it comes to informational warfare, it's the brain that is the battle space that we are battling within. It's when you see objective facts, there can be so many objective facts that you cannot really comprehend it. Our minds cannot really take in all the facts that appear. And we also have a lot of beliefs, and we tend to like to see what actually confirms our beliefs. That's much more easier to take in. And what we actually see are somewhere in the middle here, in the green span here. Somewhere about the objective facts and also what confirms our beliefs. But the world is bigger than that. The objective facts can be more than the things that confirms your beliefs. So information influence activities can actually exploit our thought patterns through this, by knowledge of this, and also by knowledge of your behavior online. What you have done online creates traces that someone else can use to target information towards you. What you get from the algorithms when you scroll during a social media flow is actually depending on what you have seen before and what someone else has programmed the app or the web page to show to you. And it gives those technical aspects some kind of influence over your perceptions, over your thoughts, and also, in the end, over your decision-making. Okay. One other important issue here are the difference between information influence and opinion formation. And this is really a key thing when we discuss this in our trainings in Sweden. It's of crucial value, because what we are tasked to do is to protect the opinion formation from illicit information influence. And I will give you an abbreviation here called MID, so that to help you to identify false information. First thing, M. It's that the information is misleading or deceiving in some part. It's intentional. It's created by someone that would like to have an effect upon you. It's disruptive because it actually hurts our fundamental values. So all of these needs to be fulfilled in one way or another, and this is a discussion of how these are fulfilled when you begin to discuss. It's not a clear-cut case in all cases. A very well-made information influence campaign are using some parts of this and mixing it with truth. And that makes it more difficult to actually identify it. And I will give you now a Swedish example. This can be different from others, but we look only at when the misleading, intentional, and disruptive information influence is directed from documented antagonists against Sweden. We are not tasked to look at all this information that we see. We should not follow disinformation that originates within Sweden. We're only following the disinformation that originates from a hostile actor, and we are using the definition that the Swedish security services are using. So we are not having any other definitions in our agency rather than what the Swedish security services are having. Okay, opinion formation. It's when a good opinion formation is when information is transparent and verified. When you can check the sources, you can fact check what has been done here. It's also that it strengthens democracy. Even if we have different opinions, that is a part of democracy. We have to confirm that a good democracy has a lot of opinions. And it can be quite nasty debates sometimes. It can be harsh, it can be emotional. But this is a part what we need to protect. If everyone is agreeing, then we are not really having a solid democracy. We need to be able to have these small differences or large differences in ideologies. It strengthens also a constructive debate between the opinions. It should not be a destructive debate when you're actually hurting an individual. You have to separate the argument from the individual, because then you have a good opinion formation process. And we are trying to protect information and opinions that are created by Swedish citizens within Sweden. So that's where we are at. And it can be like this. The earth is flat. That's a part of the opinion formation. To say that, we have to protect the citizens' right to be wrong, and sometimes also the right to lie, even if it is illicit. It's bad behavior to lie, but it's not a crime. It's not a crime to lie, because we are not the agency that will tell what is the truth within the society. We can only say when someone is lying and doing it intentionally from another country. That's when we can speak out. Okay. Some narratives to foster distrust. And here you have a QR code and a link to EU versus Disinfo, where I've used that I've used as a source for these narratives. Because you need to put information within a wider perspective, inside a narrative, because that gives it more strength. Because that is creating something that confirms people's beliefs if the information are put into a bigger system. What people are really already thinking that the world looks like. And some narratives to foster distrust can be that there is an elite that is against the people. Forms in many different ways, in many different cultures. It can be about threatened values, that certain values are threatened. Often it is conservative family values that are threatened by liberal values. It can be lost sovereignty or threatened national identity, that a country has had a great past, but now it is under threat. And the identity of a country can be under threat. It's also about some narratives that society is on an imminent collapse. And this has been used by some antagonists against Sweden for hundreds of years, at least 100 years, saying that Europe is about to fall. Europe is about to end up in a civil war. Societies are crumbling. And then we have the hahaganda narrative, when you are actually trying to put things and calling it a big joke. To say that it's not really true. It's just, you can't think about it. It's so uncertain, this thing, that you need to see it as someone that is trying to pull a string on you. So all those narratives can be used to foster distrust when you put information and they fit into this narrative. And we will now test this on an example of a disinformation piece of information that were directed against Sweden. So this is a poster on a bus stand in Moscow. And it says in Russian, if I translate it, "Don't become toys in foreign hands." And you see a picture of Uncle Sam pulling the strings of Pippi Longstocking and Moomin. And this is like, yeah, you have the source here as well. And if you find it, it might be in a different language. So you might use a translation service to be able to read it in English. We'll see. Yeah, it ends up in a Finnish website on Swedish. But what I would like you to try to see is which narrative is used to foster distrust with this. And you need to discuss a little bit. You have to know a little bit about Pippi Longstocking here and Moomin, which countries they originate in. I can say that one of them are from Sweden. And it's like trying to pull the strings on another country from another country. But why is this in Moscow? There are so many questions. There are so many questions. But it puts into a narrative here. Could it be within one of these narratives? And you will have some minutes here to discuss this with your neighbor.
You are all from Sweden. Yeah, okay. I don't know the second. Who is that?
And you're able to put a vote here on which narrative you think it fits in.
It's like a children. Well, I guess it's just to say that the NATO accession is all organized. We have two. Okay, let's see that. So it's the elite versus the people. Broken values, lost sovereignty.
Aren't anyone disagreeing?
Imminent collapse.
You don't have to jump on the bandwagon just because everyone else is voting like this.
I think number 3 is
Interesting. Thank you.
threat and value. It's also a part of national identity.
I think that would also work, yeah. The elite versus the people, probably less. Well, in a way, you could argue threatened values because you should say that Sweden and Finland, they have.
Okay, thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to comment this. May I? Thank you. Okay. Most of the individuals that have voted thinks that it has to do with the narrative lost sovereignty and threatened national identity. That is what I would think as well, and I will explain it to you now. Okay, we have the Russians might think that Uncle Sam are pulling the strings on Sweden and Finland and deciding for us if we should join NATO or not. Because this poster came up when Sweden and Finland were about to discuss a NATO application because of the renewed invasion of Ukraine 1 year ago. So that's why they wanted to see how this were actually, could they do something with this? But and this showed up, this poster showed up in some different locations. So it's very difficult to understand why it ended up in those locations and what the intent were behind it. But we can do, and you have contributed now, to analyze this a little bit here, what this was about, and what kind of values that are behind this. And then you can begin to discuss who is the target audience, what is the effect of this. But we leave that behind, because now we have just practiced a little bit about using narratives. Okay, yeah, question?
Was this outside of tourist spots? Like, was this outside of tourist spots like museums and historical sites where Finnish or Swedish tourists might have come and
No,
seen
it was outside of the consulate in Finnish consulate in St. Petersburg, I think.
Okay, so it
And
would be
some
something.
location more in Moscow. So
A Finn might show up and see it and go, "What is that?"
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But it's it has a long story. But I would like to continue, so we can take that discussion a bit later. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now capability countering information influence activities. I would like to spend a couple of minutes on discussing how we build capability. You have seen one example that ended up here. You have seen the information piece. You have seen what kind of narrative it is. But you need to do something else if you would like to build capability countering information influence activities. And I will give you a suggestion on this. You need to be able to identify malign information and differentiate this from opinions. I showed you before, it should be misleading, intentional, and disruptive for some of your fundamental values. And you have to know from where it is directed also. And to know your own mandate about what you are supposed to do within your organization. Because this can be different in different countries and different in different organizations. Analyze, and that is to understand how the techniques are using vulnerabilities within a target audience to produce an effect. And this says you need to be able to discuss this with others. It's difficult to do analysis on your own. The best part is when you have done some kind of homework on your own and then discuss it with someone else, like you have done now here twice. You need to have colleagues that are, maybe they should not be trained in exactly the same way as you. They should be able to think a little bit different, and then your arguments are actually meeting, and then you produce a better result when you do an analysis like that. You need to be able to counter the disinformation. You need to assess and be able to inform the target audiences that you would like to reach with the correct information. And you can do that in many different ways. You can also advocate your values, what you stand for, but you can also defend by blocking accounts, if you have that possibility, or also exposing the actor behind. Because you might not always know everything behind, and it's very difficult to attribute an information influence campaign to a specific aggressor against you. So you need to be very careful if you choose to go that path. Report. And that is a little bit about reporting within your own organization so that your colleagues become aware of what has happened in the information space. But it can also be reporting within a governmental system or within an organization, if you think about a corporation. But it's mainly about showing to others what you have experienced. And then support. Others might be affected as well. And you need to be able to share that information with others. You need to support others' messages if they are affected. You can prepare and come together, like we have done in Sweden. We try to build this total defense, that everyone is defending together, both on the individuals, the citizens, the local level, the regional level, the governmental level, the international level. Everyone needs to be able to support each other, because that's when we have good resilience. We are not strong on our own. We are strong together. Okay, the 4 degrees of response, and then we go into another discussion exercise. So When we train the Swedish communicators on national, regional, or local level, we try to show them these 4 degrees. The first one is to assess the situation. And that is something that you build from the beginning if you have good tools to assess the information environment, to see what is happening there. But it can also be a neutral action to show that you are actually aware of what's happening. You can begin to discuss that you are actually having a way of seeing things, because that might also be something to deflect or prevent the aggressor from using you when they know that you are actually watching. It can be about mapping situation, it can be about fact-checking, it can be about making transparent investigations. And then the second level comes up to inform. One of the first things, if you see that you're a target from information influence campaign or a specific information piece, is that you inform your target audience that you're actually working on it. You have seen it, you're working on it, you will get back soon with new information. So that's the first statement that you can do. You can then, when you have more fact, describe the facts of the case, what is actually going on. You can correct if something is misunderstood. And you can also emphasize your values, what you stand for. Third part is advocate. And that is a little bit more forward-leaning. You go into dialogue with your target audiences. You open up to discuss your values. You can help your target audience to argue and debate. You can show them that this information piece fits into a bigger narrative. You can choose to cooperate together with others, and you can also package the information and show that this is actually tied into other events. So it takes a little bit more time to advocate what is going on in the information space if you are subject for an information attack. Last part is to defend. It's about defending the organization and target specific actions against the aggressor. It can be reporting, it can be blocking accounts, and it can be about exposing. The most useful part in this is actually by ignoring the disinformation happening. That is usually the best defense. Don't do anything. Just monitor, assess. Because if you are beginning to inform and you are repeating the false information gets traction. It gets the spread that the aggressor would like to get if you are in the same way spreading it. So when I showed you the picture before of Uncle Sam and Moomin and Pippin, I was actually spreading the disinformation. But I'm trying to help you out that you are protected and you're in a safe environment and you are amongst friends and you can discuss that with someone else. And you will be able to see where it fits into different narratives. That it's a part of a campaign. It's a part of a narrative of a worldview that they would like to expose and give to you. Okay, moving on. I will give you an example, and then you will discuss. 3rd of May last year, this thing happened. Outside the Swedish embassy in Moscow. So there were some posters put up. The posters read, "We are against Nazis, they are not." And it's about one of our kings of Sweden, Gustav V. It's about Astrid Lindgren, the author of Pippi Longstocking. It's about Ingmar Bergman, the director of Fanny and Alexander, and I think it's called The Seventh Seal, where you can play chess, where one of the characters plays chess with death. And then we have also Ingvar Kamprad, the founder of IKEA. And here they're doing some really clever things. You need to know that this is about when Sweden were discussing about NATO. This is the same time, and they are using the Swedish colors, but also using the colors of another country in Europe that they have just recently invaded with the same argument. The Russians invaded Ukraine because they wanted to denazify Ukraine. And now they are saying like this, you also might be Nazis. Think of it. Okay. How to counter this disinformation? And you will help us out now. Be prepared. What would you like to do in this case? Would you like to assess the effects? Would you like to inform one of your target audiences? Would you like to advocate your values? Or would you defend by exposing? Please discuss.
Go ahead. What would you do?
Well, seeing as this is in Russia, I don't think anyone in Sweden would really see that agenda.
Yeah.
But reaching out to Russian
That's difficult. You can reach them. So you would first assess whether that has any effect.
Yeah, exactly. But I think when you put in it's also very good to really address it. Not maybe address it, but
But it's true vis-a-vis whom you would do that. Because if you do it in your country, probably there is no point because that is known. Yes, no, I agree.
Even if we would try to expose sex not being true, who would they believe? Their own government?
Yeah, I mean, inform the target audience. The target audience would be Swedes in Russia. To convince them that they should not stick to the narrative. All Russians. Yeah. But the ones that are against war are probably the ones that would not fall on this anyway. And the others that might be edging on convincing them you will not be probably from Sweden. Informing the target audience yeah, again, you would do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Please look at me and please, I'll continue. Okay, we see, yeah, thank you. Assessing the effects. Yeah, and that's just what we did. Yeah. So, in order to prevent the spread of this disinformation, we were just monitoring it. So the spread of this actually happened when the embassy staff took a picture of it and they sent it to journalists in Sweden. And you can mitigate the effects by this information if you do a good journalistic work, of course. So journalists are not really a part of the aggressor scheme, but that's how you can get traction in the system by not doing anything. This cost like $20 to put up these ones, and we are still discussing it here in this audience. So it gets but I think still it's a good example of showing how easy it is to do things and how you can spread it through journalists. But you can also mitigate it with good journalism in this way. This really had nothing to do with the Russian view of Astrid Lindgren, because she is really famous and well seen in Russia, especially by another character called Carlson on the Roof. Yeah? So it's not really, it's using her in a bigger one. They took a line from her diary and said that, yeah, she was more afraid of the Soviet Union invading Sweden rather than the Nazis. And then they say, yeah, of course she's a Nazi then. So they're just like pulling some information pieces and trying to put it together here. But it's so much information packed in this, and you can discuss it for length about what was actually going on and what is behind the different statements in this. That's that. Thank you for your contributions. So some conclusions of this now are, there are 4 pieces of conclusions that I would like you to bring with you from this. The first one is this: build trust. Build trust among citizens, amongst institutions, from the citizens towards the government, but also from the government to trust your citizens that they're actually doing the right things and that they can be helping out by being informed and being able to resist disinformation. Strategic narratives. Use your own strategic narratives. Use counter-narratives. Use your own stories. Explain why you would like to defend your values, what your values are. Why would you like to risk your life if there is a war coming to your country? What is really worthwhile within yourselves to fight for? Why would you risk your life still going to work during wartime instead of fleeing? Understand your target audiences. Whom are you actually trying to reach with your story? But you need also to understand your adversary. What are the values? Why do they attack your values? If you're a country, you can go to World Values Survey and you can see where your country is mapped into different value systems. I'm using that in my trainings to try to help Swedish communicators and Brazilian coordinators to understand, why are we a threat? We are Swedish people. We are just in the middle of everything. We are no extremists. But we are, according to World Values Surveys. We are the most secular and individualistic country in the world, and one of the more liberal ones when it comes to values. And we don't see ourselves like that. But others, more conservative cultures, might see us like that and see that as a threat. And you need also to understand that the disinformation that we are working with in the Swedish Psychological Defense Agency are coming from a foreign aggressor. It's not, we don't see it as something domestic. We are a defense agency, and defense agency and the armed forces are not allowed to be used against Swedish citizens. And that comes from the 30s, when we had a crisis, when the military were used against citizens, and the police called for help, and there was a shooting and people died. And after that, Swedish military are not allowed to be used within Sweden if they can come into a position where they can use force against the civilian. They can be used, of course, to help out in crises, but not when they are using armed force. And the last part here. Share best practices. Learn from each other. When you have experienced something, when you have a good story to tell it to others. Build your own networks. We base our work on research. Some of this research are here. We are updating this now with a new countering information influence activities state-of-the-art, a new round of going through the latest research about that. But you can read the one from 2017 here on this QR code. And then we use that research to form a handbook for communicators. And you can have that on the other QR code here as well. So most part of my presentation are coming from this handbook. It's also about to be updated, I promise you, because it's a couple of years old, and there are ways, experiences. We learn how this has been received by our target audiences when we train people. So we have some good ideas on it, but we need to base this on research. And questions and comments on this are welcome. So if you have any questions and comments, feel free to type them in here into Menti. I will soon remove this, but if you have any questions and comments, I will be able to read them later on when we have done this. And on that note, you will have that in your phone, even if I remove it like this. I'm finished. And here you have the QR code for our agency's English webpage. And you can contact us through that webpage. You will have an email address there. If you need to discuss some things or ask things, you can reach me or Catherine or Magnus or Torkel through that. Thank you very much for your contributions. I hope you have learned something.
I'll be brief because I'm in between you and a good amount of vitamin D upstairs. But I hope that this has been useful in terms of the discussion as well as the presentation. It's really, really hard to grapple with real examples. It's easy to sit up on a panel and say, well, this is disinformation. That seems hard. We should grapple with these ideas. It's a lot harder to look at a poster or look at a real-world example and say, oh, well, here's the trade-offs, here's the balances, here's the things that we can actually do about this. And many times, none of those answers are particularly thorough or comprehensive. They start to chip away at building resilience. And so as we talk about this, building into getting away from threat-based frameworks, which is something that we talked about a lot without calling them that during the panel, but threat-based frameworks. There is a thing that is in the information environment that is something we're against, as opposed to resilience-based frameworks that protect the space for information of flow, the greatest strength of open information environments. And so transitioning from threat-based frameworks to resilience-based frameworks being imperative for all of our work in building, as we say, more resilience. And encouraging and indeed protecting the actual debate, the ability to grapple with, as Martin said during the panel, new discoveries or new information that we depend on going forward into the future. And so really, really thank you for the presentation. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for grappling with these issues at the root of trust and truth and hope. And thank you to our hosts at the Embassy of Sweden. Thank you to Martin and Karin on short notice, I should say, as well as Magnus for the discussion. And we will see you at the next version of the conversation where we're talking about the shared set of facts, as well as the shared responsibility that we have for protecting open information environments. Thank you so much.
Thank you.